The Hall of the First Stone was the oldest, most sacred space on Val Taros. Its walls were the raw, original rock of the planet, untouched by tool, symbolizing the Korvax ideal of unyielding permanence. It was here that the fate of species was decided. Today, the air was not charged with the certainty of old, but with the electric hum of a future being born. High Commander Kale stood before the full assembly of the Grand Conclave, the ruling families and the military legions. He looked older, the lines on his stone-like face not of age, but of the profound fatigue that comes from a shattered worldview. Beside him, on a platform that had never held a non-Korvax, stood Jin and Myra. Tolan stood a step behind them. A bridge between two eras. We gathered here, Kale's voice began, its usual booming certainty replaced by a gravelly rumble of concession, to witness the formal inclusion of humanity into the galactic concord. We expected to welcome a young species into the order we built. We did not expect to be taught. He paused, the silence vast and listening. We believed strength was a single thing, the power to withstand, to dominate, to be unmoved. We built our civilization on this truth. And it was a truth. But it was not the only truth. He gestured to Jin. They showed us another. Strength can be the wisdom to bend, to redirect, to adapt. They did not break our warriors in the arena. They showed us a new application of physics. They did not cure our young with a mightier medicine. They outtaught the sickness with a living key. He turned his gaze to the crowd, to the traditionalists whose faces were still set in stubborn defiance. We called it dishonor. We called it contamination. But the results are before us. Our children are recovering. Our fleet saved a colony not by being a harder wall, but by being a smarter net. He stepped down from the central podium, the act itself a monumental shift. He walked to where Tolan stood. The future does not belong to the hardest stone alone. It belongs to the most adaptable mind. Therefore, I propose and will endorse a new structure. Not just membership for humanity, but a shared stewardship. A new branch of the Concord, the Adaptive Defense and Innovation Directorate, led jointly by Korvax and human minds. A murmur, like grinding continents, moved through the hall. It was not a roar of approval, but nor was it a shout of rebellion. It was the sound of a deep fundamental recalculation. The ceremony that followed was not the grand, militaristic display originally planned. It was simpler. Human and Korvax engineers stood together, activating a holographic model of the first joint project, a starship. Its hull was forged from Korvax adamantine, unbreakable as ever. But its internal systems, its neural network, its tactical core, were based on human fluid design, a system that learned and evolved during combat, that could redistribute power, reroute commands, and adapt to threats in real time. They called it the USS Bastion of Dawn Dot after the formalities. Jin and Mira walked with Tolan in the crystalline gardens. The stark light of Valteros seemed softer now, or perhaps it was their perception. It is a strange thing, Tolan said, his steps slow and thoughtful. For cycles, we measured our worth by our resistance. Now we must learn to measure it by our capacity to change. It is unsettling. Growth always is, Mira said. My people have a saying, a ship is safe in the harbor. But that is not what ships are for. You have been the magnificent, unbreakable harbor for the galaxy. Now you are building a new kind of ship. Jin nodded, looking up at the stars beginning to pierce the twilight. You did not lose what you were, Tolan. You added to it. A wall is strong. A wall with a gate is wise. Years later, the shift was no longer theory. It was history. The Bastion of Dawn and its sister ships became legendary. In the war against the drifters, now a fading threat, they were unstoppable. Korvac's hardening protected them from direct blows, while human adaptive systems predicted and countered the drifters' every clever move. It was the perfect synergy of withstand and adapt. On Earth, in a joint research campus, Korvax and human scientists worked side by side. Korvax brought their profound understanding of material science and cosmic forces. Humans brought their frenetic, iterative, fail-fast methodology. Together, they cured 2 more galactic plagues, stabilized a dying star, and designed quantum communications networks that worked in the heart of nebulas. The old guard, like Kale, never became fully comfortable, but they found a new respect. Kale, in his retirement, took up the human game of Go, fascinated by its layers of strategy and indirect influence. He was terrible at it, but he learned. The final scene was not in a grand hall, but in a shipyard, orbiting a neutral world. Jin, his hair now touched with gray, stood on an observation deck with Tolan. Before them, suspended in the void, was the promise of Teros, the first megastructure of the new alliance, a shipyard that could rebuild itself if damaged, growing new docking arms and repair bays as needed. It was part crystal, part organic polymer, part something entirely new. They are naming the principle after you. You know, Tolan said, a hint of dry amusement in his tone. In our academies. The Jin paradox, the observable fact that applied flexibility can overcome superior static force. Jin laughed, a soft, easy sound. It's not a paradox. It's just a different tool in the box. You had the hammer. We had the lever. Now, he gestured to the incredible living shipyard, you have the whole toolbox. Tolan was silent for a long moment, watching the slow, graceful dance of construction drones. You know, when you first came, we thought we were granting you a place in our story. We were wrong. You did not break our story. You? He searched for the word, the human word Jin had used so long ago in the arena. You redirected it. Jin smiled, placing a hand on Tolan's solid shoulder. That's what friends do. And across the galaxy, history once a straight, unbroken line of Korvax supremacy, recorded on stone tablets, now flowed like water. It bent around obstacles, it carved new paths, and nourished new ideas. It accelerated into a future no single species could have imagined, all because the strongest species met humans, and learned that the ultimate strength is not in being unbreakable, but in being unendingly adaptable. The shift was complete. The dawn of a new age had truly begun. The air in the hidden lab was cool and smelled of clean chemicals and ozone. It was a small room, tucked away in a lower level of the medical citadel, far from the grand, austere halls of Korvax power. Here, the theory of human adaptability met the gritty reality of Korvax desperation. Yuna's hologram flickered above a central console, her face a portrait of intense focus. Beside her, her brother Min worked the physical instruments with calm hands. Across from them, a young Korvax scientist named Nara watched, her stone-like features trying to hide her deep unease. They were cultivating the enemy, and then trying to cultivate the enemy of the enemy. It felt wrong. The culture is stable, Nara reported, her voice a soft scrape. The affliction nanites are replicating as predicted. Good, Yuna said from light years away. Now, introduce the tailored phage. Not all at once. A small sample. We observe. This was the part that horrified the Korvax instincts. They were adding another living thing to the mix. It was contamination. It was chaos. Min gently administered the clear fluid from a slender vial. Nothing happened visibly. On the molecular scanners, a silent war began. The Korvax method was to apply a universal solution and watch for a result success or failure. The human method, Nara was learning, was about iteration. It's not working, Nara said after an hour. watching the affliction levels hold steady. It's not working. Min corrected gently, pointing to a secondary readout. See, the phage is attaching. It's learning. This is the first test. We learn why it didn't penetrate. We adjust the design. We try again. Again? Nara asked. But it failed. We learned something, Yuna's hologram said. Failure is data. We fail fast. We learn fast. We adapt fast. Please prepare the culture for variant B. Nara did as instructed, her mind struggling. To a Korvax, failure was a sign of a flawed plan, a weak material. To these humans, failure was a step on the path. It was a relentless, grinding persistence of thought. It was a different kind of endurance. While the secret medical work continued, a louder, more violent crisis erupted. The Drifters, an ancient nomadic threat that preyed on fringe worlds, attacked the Korvax mining colony on Glycine 4. The Drifters were scavengers, but clever and unpredictable. Their ships were fast, their tactics erratic. The Korvax response was immediate and mighty. A fleet of their heaviest cruisers, floating fortresses of armor and massive beam weapons. Jumped to Glycine IV. High Commander Kale himself oversaw the defense from the command citadel on Valteros. The strategy was the unchanging Korvax strategy. Form an unbreakable wall between the enemy and the colony, and destroy anything that came near. The Drifters did not come near. They swarmed. Dozens of small, agile fighters, like metallic insects, flowed around the lumbering Korvax cruisers. They didn't target the shields or the hulls. They targeted sensor arrays, engine ports, communication relays. They were not trying to break the wall. They were trying to blind it, trip it, confuse it. On the command holotank, Kale watched in growing fury as his magnificent ship spun slowly, firing devastating bolts of energy that missed the nimble Drifters again and again. It was like a great beast being stung to death by flies. One cruiser, its thrusters disabled by pinpoint strikes, began a slow, helpless drift out of formation. Close ranks. Tighten the defensive sphere. Kale ordered. The wall became a tighter, harder wall. The Drifters simply found new, softer points to sting Jin and Mira, or in a monitoring room, observing the tactical feed with Tolan. Tolan's face was grim. Our strength is useless against this. They do not fight with honor. They fight to win, Jin said softly, his eyes fixed on the swirling dance of destruction. Your fleet is a fist. They are dust, slipping through your fingers. What would you do? Tolan asked, a desperate edge in his voice. Jin studied the map. You cannot catch dust with a fist. You need a net, or a breeze to blow it away. He pointed. Break the fleet into small, independent groups. Pairs of ships. Give them autonomy to hunt. They don't protect the colony by being a shield. They protect it by being a swarm of hunters, chasing the Drifters away, making the space around the colony dangerous for them. It was the opposite of every Korvax tactical doctrine. It was decentralization. It was trusting smaller units. It was frightening. Kale would never approve it. Tolan knew this. He looked at the feed, at another cruiser being harassed into helplessness. He thought of the children in the medical citadel, and of Yuna in her lab, failing fast to learn. He made a choice. Using his own command codes, Tolan opened a channel to the Stone Fury, a mid-sized destroyer on the edge of the battle whose captain was a reformist sympathizer. Captain Vor, this is Tolan. I am transmitting a modified engagement pattern. Adopt it now. The pattern, designed by Jin and refined by Human Tactical A, was fluid and responsive. The Stone Fury and 2 corvettes broke from the main formation. They stopped trying to be a wall. They became a pack. They harried the Drifter swarm, cutting off stragglers, forcing them into each other's paths, using their own momentum against them. One corvette, acting as bait, led a dozen drifter fighters into the firing arc of the Stone Fury. The destroyer didn't fire a massive, slow cannon. It launched a spread of fast, agile missiles. The result was a chain of small, precise explosions that wiped out the pursuing swarm. On the command holotank, Kale saw the anomaly. What is the Stone Fury doing? Who authorized that break in formation? Before anyone could answer, they saw the results. The small Korvax pack was actually winning. They had destroyed more drifter craft in 5 minutes than the entire main fleet had in an hour. The drifters, confused by the new tactic, began to lose their coordinated swarm. Their advantage evaporated. The battle turned. Emboldened, other ship captains, seeing the success, began to emulate the pack behavior. The great sluggish fist of the Korvax fleet dissolved into a dozen snapping jaws. Within an hour, the drifter attack was broken, their remaining ships fleeing into the void. The silence in the command citadel was heavier than any defeat. They had won, but they had won by abandoning their sacred principle of concentrated, unbreakable force. They had won by becoming. Adaptive. Back in the lab, a chime sounded. Nara stared at the scanner, disbelief in her eyes. The affliction nanite count. It's dropping. Variant G of the phage is binding and dismantling them. Efficiency at 78% and climbing. She looked at Min, then at Yuna's hologram. It's working. Min allowed himself a small smile. Iteration G, we just needed to find the right key. The two events, the battle and the breakthrough, reached the Korvax public at the same time. The visual of the Stone Fury's pack tactics was played alongside the first promising medical data. The connection was impossible to ignore. Kale stood before the conclave again, but the ground had vanished beneath his feet. The evidence was now galactic. The old strength had stalled against a disease and been humiliated by pirates. The new way, the human-influenced way of adaptability, decentralization, and clever leverage had provided victory in both arenas. He looked across the chamber at Tolan, who stood with quiet assurance. He looked at the faces of the other commanders. Their certainty eroded. The strongest species in the galaxy had met humans and had been shown, in the crucible of war and the quiet of a lab, that their definition of strength was incomplete. True strength was not just the power to resist. It was the flexibility to change, the courage to try a different way, and the wisdom to know when the fist must open into a hand. History did not just shift. It broke its old course entirely, rushing into a new, uncharted channel. A quiet tremor was moving through Valteros. It was not in the stone, but in the conversations. The footage from the proving grounds spread from official channels to public forums, from military barracks to civilian homes. The image of Jin, a being of soft flesh and bone, using the Korvax champion's own might to lay him low, was a pebble that started an avalanche. High Commander Kale stood before the Grand Conclave, the ruling body of Korvax. The atmosphere was heavy, like the air before a tectonic shift. It was a controlled demonstration, Kale insisted, his voice the steady grind of stone. The principles shown, while clever, are irrelevant in the scale of stellar warfare. Our strength lies in our ship's armor, our planetary shields, our unyielding will. These are not overturned by a leverage trick. A younger commander, Tolan, rose. He was of a new generation, his carapace less ornate, his eyes sharper. He had studied the humans since their arrival. With respect, High Commander, it is not about the single trick. It is about the pattern. They did not meet any challenge on our terms. They changed the terms. What if our enemies learn to do the same? What if the drifters stop attacking our shields and start finding ways to bypass them? The word bypass hung in the air. The Korvax philosophy was to build a stronger wall. The human philosophy, it seemed, was to find a gate or to dig a tunnel. The concept was unsettling. Enough, rumbled an elder. This distracts from a real crisis. The affliction. A cold silence fell. The affliction was a medical plague affecting their young. It caused a softening of the exoskeletal joints, a debilitating weakness in the next generation. Korvax medical science, the finest in the galaxy, was baffled. It had thrown every known antibiotic, every hardening agent, every radiation treatment at the disease. The disease adapted. It was like trying to crush fog with a hammer. Their greatest strength overwhelming force was useless. Kale saw an opportunity to redirect the Conclave's anxiety. Precisely. Our focus must be on our own, not on strange human philosophies. Tolan did not sit down. And what if the two are connected? He activated a holodisplay. It showed the human Jin, redirecting force. Then it showed a simulation of the affliction, attacking not the strong, solid plates of Korvax biology, but the tiny, flexible junctions between them. We attack problems head-on. The affliction does not. It is clever. Like the humans. Perhaps we need a clever solution. The idea was heresy. To suggest they needed outside help, especially from a species so physically weak, was a blow to the soul. The debate raged, but the cracks in Korvax unity were now visible for all to see. The traditionalists, led by Kale, closed ranks around their old ways. The reformers, led by Tolan, began speaking quietly of adaptive potential. 2 days later, Tolan requested a private meeting with Jin and Mira. He met them in a secluded garden of crystalline fungi. Your demonstration opened many eyes, Tolan said, his voice lower, less formal than Kale's. But talk is cheap. My people face a real problem we cannot solve. Our young are sick. Our science fails. Myra listened intently. You've tried stronger treatments? The strongest we have. The disease counteracts them. It is like trying to hold water in a fist. Jin exchanged a look with Myra. Our strength is not in making stronger fists, Jin said quietly. Can you help? Tolan asked, the question costing him a great deal of pride. Not with strength, but with a different angle. Myra nodded. We have a colleague. A Dr. Yuna. Her specialty is not in overwhelming pathogens, but in outmaneuvering them. She calls it microbial judo. May we speak with her? Yuna's face appeared on a secure screen hours later. She was young, with a calm and focused demeanor. Tolan explained the affliction, showing the microscopic scans. Yuna watched, fascinated. You are treating it like a fortress to be bombarded, she said finally. But it acts like a guerrilla army. It hides, it adapts. You need a smarter weapon. A smarter bomb? Tolan asked, confused. No, Yuna said, a slight smile on her lips. A predator. Or a key. She explained the human concept of a bacteriophage, a virus that specifically hunts and destroys bacteria. We would need to study the affliction's exact structure. Then we could design a biological agent, a tailored virus, that seeks only it out and dismantles it from within. It uses the pathogen's own replication methods against it. Tolan was silent for a long time. The idea was shocking, almost repulsive. To fight a living plague with another living weapon? It was messy. It was unpredictable. It was not the Korvax way. Their way was clean, absolute force, sterilize the area. But sterilizing the patient killed the patient. The Conclave will never allow it, Tolan said. Introducing a new living agent is seen as a contamination, a weakness. It is not weakness, Jin said. It is using the enemy's nature against them. It is the same as the combat trial. You do not meet the enemy's strength. You use it. Tolan made a decision. It was the most dangerous of his life. I will take you to the Hall of Healing. You will see the afflicted. You and Yuna will have the data you need. But this must be secret. If Kale finds out, they understood. That night, under the guise of a cultural tour, Tolan led Jin and Mira deep into the medical citadel. They passed rows of stasis pods where Korvac's young lay, their normally hard limbs looking brittle and dull. The sight of the mighty species brought low by something so small hit Jin and Mira powerfully. This was not a game in an arena. This was survival. Mira collected genetic and cellular data with a small scanner, transmitting it instantly to Yuna on the human ship in orbit. Yuna's response was swift. Fascinating. It's a nanoscale engineer. It doesn't poison. It reprograms. A hammer won't work. We need a precise scalpel. I can design a counteragent, but I will need Korvac's biolabs to synthesize it. And there will be risk. The agent could mutate. Tolan looked at the small, soft humans, then at the suffering children of his people. He thought of Kale's unyielding stance, of the endless, futile applications of force. He thought of Jin, turning Borb's power against him. A path of absolute strength had led to a dead end. Perhaps a different path was needed. I will arrange lab access, Tolan said, his voice firm with new resolve. We will do this, not as Korvacs helping humans, or humans helping Korvacs, but as students of a new principle working together. The secret project began. In a hidden lab, a small team of Korvacs medical technicians, their minds reeling from the paradigm shift, worked alongside Yuna via hologram and a human assistant, a quiet man named Min. They were not building a bigger hammer. They were, as Yuna put it, building a key to pick the enemy's lock. News of the secret collaboration did not stay secret for long. Kale's agents reported unusual activity in the medical citadel. When he discovered Tolan was working with the humans on a living weapon, his wrath was instant and terrible. He confronted Tolan in the Grand Conclave, his voice shaking the very crystal of the chamber. You have betrayed our purity. You introduce alien biology into our very essence. This is the weakness those humans bring. They do not make us stronger. They make us like them, soft, cunning, infected with doubt. Tolan stood his ground. And what is your solution, High Commander? More of the same? More treatments that fail while our young fade. They do not need us to be like them. They need us to be smarter than the problem. For the first time, we are not just pushing against the affliction. We are thinking about it. The split was now formal and painful. Korvac society fractured between the old strength and a terrifying new potential. The strongest species in the galaxy had met humans, and now faced a mirror held up to their deepest crisis. In the reflection, they did not see an answer written in stone. They saw an answer being woven, strand by delicate, terrifying strand, in a hidden lab. History was no longer shifting quietly. It was cracking open. The morning light on Val Taros was not gentle. It was a stark, white glare that reflected off the polished stone of the proving grounds, a vast arena where Korvac's champions had settled disputes for millennia. Today, it would host a different kind of dispute, a clarification of reality. High Commander, Kale had decided theory required practical demonstration. The humans' strange ideas needed to be exposed to the hard light of fact. The trials were not meant to be cruel, but instructive. The galaxy had rules. The humans would learn them. Jin and Mira stood at the edge of the arena, accompanied by a few other human aides. They wore simple, functional clothing. They looked small against the towering, mineral-like forms of the Korvac's audience and the immense scale of the grounds. The first trial is of pure strength, Kale announced, his voice amplified across the silent arena. A Korvac's champion, even larger than the others, stepped forward. His name was Borv. In the center of the arena lay a dense alloy cube, a standard weight for Korvac's powerlifting competitions. With a grunt that sounded like cracking stone, Borv squatted, wrapped his arms around the cube, and lifted it cleanly to his chest, then overhead. He held it there, muscles locked, for a 10 count before slamming it down. The impact sent a vibration through the feet of every spectator. The Korvac's crowd made a low, approving rumble. Kale looked at Jin. The weight is 5 tons. Can your species match this output? Jin looked at the cube, then at the simple tools and materials left in a pile to the side part of the arena's standard obstacle course. He walked over, not to the cube, but to the pile. He selected strong, flexible cables and a series of pulleys from a climbing frame. With the help of Mira and another human named Lee, he quickly fastened the cables around the cube, threaded them through the pulleys, which he anchored to a heavy, fixed post at the arena's edge. We cannot match Borv's muscle output, High Commander, Jin said calmly. But the task was to lift the weight, yes? He then took hold of the free end of the cable. With a steady, relatively effortless pull, he began to haul. The pulley system multiplied his force. The 5-ton tube left the ground, rising smoothly into the air until it dangled a full meter up. Jin held it there, his feet planted firmly, his arms straining but not shaking. The silence was absolute. He had not overcome the weight with his body. He had tricked it with geometry. Kale stared. The Korvacs understood machines, of course. They had mighty engines, but they were for starships, not for a single being in an arena. To see a human use such a basic arrangement to complete a trial of strength, it felt like a violation of the spirit of the law. Yet the cube was in the air. The second trial was endurance. A platform was exposed to a focused array of lights, simulating the heat and radiation of 2 close suns. A Korvac's female Rin took her place in the center. She stood at attention, her heat-resistant skin growing duller as it absorbed the punishing energy. She was a statue. Weathering the storm. Jin and Mira were directed to the platform. They did not stand still. First, they used a reflective thermal sheet from their gear, rigging it quickly into a small angled canopy that deflected the worst of the heat. They had water, which they drank in small, regular sips. Most interestingly to the watching Korvacs, they did not simply endure together. They took turns. Every few minutes, one would step briefly into the small shadow, while the other monitored. They shared the burden. After a time, Rin was still standing, but sensors showed her core temperature was rising dangerously, her energy reserves depleting. The humans, under their canopy, drinking water, rotating, were within safe limits. They were not tougher. They were smarter about the problem. They managed their resources. The Korvac's ideal was to outlast the sun itself. The human method was to outlast the sun together, with a little shade and water. Kale's earlier irritation was now a cold knot in his gut. They were not failing the tests. They were rewriting them. The final trial was combat. It was non-lethal, a contest of dominance. Borv stepped forward again, eager to restore clarity. He pointed a thick finger at Jin. The message was clear. Jin nodded. He removed his outer jacket and stepped onto the marked circle. The difference was almost absurd. Borv was a mountain of living stone. Jin was a sapling. The Korvac's crowd expected a quick, merciful end. The signal sounded. Borv charged, fast for his size, his arms wide to grab and crush. Jin did not brace. He did not meet the charge. He moved aside at the last second, his hand shooting out not to strike, but to grab Borv's extended wrist. Jin turned his body, pulling and adding his own momentum to Borv's. It was a fluid, circular motion. Borv's own immense power, unopposed but redirected, carried him forward and off balance. His feet left the ground. With a thunderous crash that shook the arena, the Korvax champion landed flat on his back. The breath knocked from him in a shocked gust. Jin had not thrown a punch. He had barely exerted any force of his own. He had used Borv's force, redirected it along a new path. He now knelt, one knee lightly on Borv's chest, his hand near the Korvax's throat in a symbolic pin. The entire sequence had taken 3 seconds. The silence was profound, broken only by Borv's stunned wheezing. Jin stood up immediately and offered a hand. Borv stared at it, then at Jin's face, searching for mockery. He saw none, only calm respect. Hesitantly, he took the hand, and Jin helped haul him to his feet. Kale could not speak. The spectacle rewrote fundamental Korvax understanding. Victory was achieved by being stronger, by being harder, by being more. This human had been less in every physical measure, and had won completely. The principle he had spoken of redirecting force was not theory. It was a devastatingly effective reality. He looked at Mira. She was watching him, not the arena. Her expression was not triumphant. It was observant. She saw his confusion, his crumbling certainty. After the trials, in the austere halls, the mood had shifted. The Korvax no longer looked at the humans with bemused superiority. They looked at them with wary curiosity, and in some cases, a dawning, unsettling respect. The younger warriors, especially, gathered in small groups, mimicking the flowing motion Jin had used, trying to understand it. Kale found Jin and Mira near their quarters. "Your methods," he began, struggling for words. "They are not honorable combat. They are tricks." Jin met his gaze. "High Commander, is a trick that saves your life and ends a conflict quickly dishonorable? Or is it efficient? My people have a saying, 'The hardest steel is forged in the hottest fire.' But we also have another. 'The bamboo that bends is stronger than the oak that breaks.' We value both." Kale had no answer. He had spent his life forging steel. The concept of choosing to be bamboo was alien. That night, the Korvax media channels were abuzz. The footage of the small human flipping the mighty Borv was played on repeat. The commentary was a mix of outrage and fascination. The old guard, like Kale, called it a fluke, a dishonorable tactic that would fail in real war. But a new word was being used by the younger generation, whispered in the training halls. They didn't call it a trick anymore. They called it the clever hand move. It was no longer an insult. Alone in his chamber, Kale re-watched the sensor logs of the combat trial. He slowed it down, analyzing the angles, the footwork. It was physics. Perfect, elegant, efficient physics. It was not magic. It was, as the human said, a principle. And if one principle they held was wrong, what others might be? The strongest species in the galaxy had met humans, and in a sun-drenched arena had been shown that the universe permitted more paths to victory than they had ever dreamed. Their unbreakable wall of certainty now had a crack, and through it shone a strange, new, and deeply unsettling light. The great hall of Val Turos was a monument to strength. Its pillars were carved from a single, unbreakable crystal, and the floor was a seamless sheet of polished black stone, hard enough to blunt any tool. Light came not from lamps, but from captured stars held in magnetic fields high above. In this room, the Korvax High Command had accepted the surrender of empires. Today, they were meeting a curiosity. High Commander Kale stood on the central dais, his skin like gray granite, his frame broad and solid. He was the living ideal of his species, unyielding, permanent. For 5,000 cycles, the Korvax had been the undisputed strongest. Their bones were denser than steel, their muscles could tear metal, and their will was absolute. They had never lost a war. They considered the concept of defeat to be a flaw in physics. The human delegation was escorted in. To the Korvax, they looked impossibly fragile. Their skin was soft. Their movements lacked the heavy, deliberate grace of a Korvax. They wore simple, dark uniforms, not armor. The leader, a man named Jin, had a calm face and watchful eyes. Beside him, a woman named Mira observed everything. Her expression one of quiet interest, not awe. Be welcome, humans. To the heart of the Concord, Kale's voice boomed. Translated by the small devices the humans wore, we have reviewed your species data. Your persistence is noted. Today, you will witness the standard by which the galaxy measures strength. It was not a boast. It was a simple statement of fact, like describing gravity. The demonstration began. Korvax warriors performed acts of breathtaking power. One shattered a massive slab of condensed carbon with a single punch. Another stood unmoved as a heavy energy beam, capable of cutting through ship hulls, washed over his shielded skin. A third lifted a chunk of machinery the size of a ground vehicle, veins like cables standing out on his arms, and held it aloft for a full minute before dropping it with a floor-shaking crash. The air smelled of ozone and powdered stone. Jin and Mira watched. They did not flinch at the noise. They did not gasp. They watched the way a mechanic watches an engine, noting sounds, movements, and stresses. Kale watched the humans watch. Their lack of reaction was incorrect. Every other species displayed fear or desperate admiration. These humans displayed analysis. It was faintly irritating. These are the fundamentals of power, Kale announced, gesturing to his warriors, who stood, unmarked and unbreathing heavily from their efforts. To absorb, to withstand, to overpower directly. This is the Korvax way. This is the only way to true stability. Jin stepped forward slightly, his movement fluid where the Korvax were rigid. He gave a small, polite nod. It is truly impressive, High Commander. A remarkable display of pure force. Kale inclined his head, accepting the obvious. Jin continued, his tone curious, not challenging. If I may ask, have your warriors ever explored the principle of redirecting force rather than meeting it directly? A silence fell. It wasn't a hostile silence, but a confused one. The Korvax in the hall looked at one another. Redirect? Force was to be conquered, not shepherded. Explain, Kale said, his voice flat. It is a simple concept in some of our martial traditions, Jin said. Using an opponent's own strength and momentum against them. It allows a smaller person to control a larger one. A low rumble, a Korvax chuckle, moved through the room. The idea was amusing. A smaller being controlling a larger one? Physics did not work that way. Force was absolute. Myra spoke then, her voice clear. We have concepts like leverage. The application of force at the right point can multiply its effect. Or a system of pulleys to lift great weights with less input strength. She gestured politely toward the warrior who had lifted the vehicle. Your method is one solution. Very effective. But not the only one. Kale studied them. He saw no deception, only a calm statement of a different reality. It was disorienting. Their strength, clearly, was not in their bodies. It was somewhere else, behind their eyes, in their minds. A Korvax mind was a tool for focus, for will, for enduring pain. It seemed a human mind was a tool for rearrangement, for seeing the world not as a wall to break, but as a set of tools to use. Your words are theoretical, Kale stated, dismissing the oddity. Theory is for scholars. Reality. He struck his own chest with a fist, producing a sound like rocks clashing. Is built on what is solid and unbreakable. Come, the banquet will show you Korvax endurance as well. The banquet was another test. The foods were dense, hard to digest, spiced with minerals that would burn the lining of most species' stomachs. The drink was a viscous fluid that provided immense energy but required a mighty metabolism to process. The humans ate and drank sparingly, sampling without consuming full portions. They did not become ill. They did not weaken. They conversed, asking questions about Korvac's history, about their art, about how they built their cities. Kale found himself answering, drawn into a discussion about architectural load distribution. Jin made an observation about dispersing stress through a lattice rather than a solid block, which was, Kale realized with a start, another version of this redirecting idea. Applied to buildings. By the end of the cycle, the Korvac's high commander was unsettled. The humans had passed their tests not by matching Korvac's strength, but by subtly stepping around the very premise of the tests. They had not tried to be harder. They had been adaptable. It was a trait the Korvacs had no measure for, no scale to weigh. Strength could be quantified. How did one quantify flexibility? That night, in his private quarters, Kale reviewed the sensor data from the hall. The humans' physiological readings during the demonstrations showed elevated heart rates, increased brain activity. Not fear, not excitement. It was consistent with high-level cognitive processing. They were thinking hard, while his warriors were performing. He looked out at the spires of Volteros, each one declaration of permanence against the universe. For the first time in his long life, a quiet heresy of a thought whispered in Kale's mind. What if the universe did not always reward the most unbreakable thing? What if, sometimes, it rewarded the thing that could bend and not break? He shook his head, the motion grinding like pebbles. No, it was a fleeting doubt. Tomorrow would be the formal trials. The humans would see real power, and their interesting theories would shatter against the immutable reality of Korvac's might. He was sure of it, but the seed was planted. The strongest species in the galaxy had met humans, and for the first time had encountered an idea they could not immediately crush, the idea that there might be another kind of strength. And in the quiet, stony mind of High Commander Kale, history, unbeknownst to him, trembled on its axis.